The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease, the kind of smell that soaks into your clothes and follows you home. Elena Vasquez had worked a late shift at Morrow's all-night diner for 3 years. She knew every crack in the laminate countertop, every sticky booth, every customer who came in just to sit somewhere warm. She never complained. Complaining didn't pay rent. It was a Tuesday in November when the old man walked in. He came in alone, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how he moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who had learned long ago that the world would wait for him. He wore a dark overcoat despite the mild weather. His shoes were polished. His hands, Elena noticed as she set down his water glass, were covered in faded scars. "Just coffee," he said. His voice was low and smooth, the kind that made you feel like you were being let in on something. "Anything to eat?" Elena asked. He looked up at her. His eyes were pale gray, sharp beneath heavy brows. "You recommend anything. The pie's good tonight, cherry. We made it fresh." He smiled a slow, tired smile. "Then pie it is." His name, she would later learn, was Aldo Ferri. He was 74 years old. He had built one of the most feared criminal organizations on the eastern seaboard. He had ordered things done that Elena would never fully know about, things better left unread in the court documents that bore his name. But that night, he was just a quiet old man eating cherry pie. He sat for 2 hours. He didn't use his phone. He didn't read. He just sat, watching the rain move down the window glass, occasionally sipping his coffee, occasionally glancing at Elena with an expression she couldn't quite name. Not threatening, not sad, something in between. When he finally asked for his check, he reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded napkin. He smoothed it out on the table. Then he reached into his breast pocket and produced a pen, a heavy, silver pen, the kind people kept as heirlooms. "Write your name here," he said, pointing to the napkin. Elena raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. Your full name, please." He paused. "Humor an old man." She almost said no. She almost laughed it off. But there was something in his eyes, not danger, not manipulation, just a quiet, pressing sincerity that made her pick up the pen. She wrote, Elena Maria Vasquez, *. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded the napkin, placed it in his pocket, left a crisp 20 on the table, and walked out into the rain. He was dead before morning. And 2 days later, a lawyer knocked on Elena's apartment door with a briefcase, a sealed envelope, and a look on his face like a man who had been dreading this visit for a very long time. The lawyer's name was Gerald Hatch. He was a small man with a large briefcase and the kind of careful, measured movements that suggested he had learned, somewhere along the way, to be very precise about everything he did. Elena stood in the doorway of her apartment in a worn sweatshirt and socks, holding a mug of instant coffee, staring at him like he was a hallucination. "Miss Vasquez," he said, "I represent the estate of Aldo Ferri. May I come in?" She didn't move. "I don't know anyone named Aldo Ferri." "You served him cherry pie on Tuesday evening." He paused. He spoke very highly of it. She let him in. The apartment was small and honest. A second-hand couch, a bookshelf crammed with paperbacks, a window that faced a brick wall. Gerald Hatch sat on the edge of the couch like he was afraid to commit to it. He set his briefcase on the coffee table, clicked it open, and removed a sealed envelope, cream-colored, heavy, Elena's full name written across the front in ink so dark it looked almost black. "Mr. Ferri passed away early Wednesday morning," Gerald said. "Natural causes. He had been ill for some time. He cleared his throat. In the final weeks of his life, he made significant changes to his estate documents. You are named as primary beneficiary." The mug in Elena's hand tilted slightly. She caught it. "That's not possible," she said. "I met him once." "I understand this is surprising. I don't even know his last name." "I'm aware." "Then why?" "Miss Vasquez." Gerald folded his hands on his knee. Mr. Ferri was a complicated man with a complicated history. His reasons were his own. What I can tell you is that his wishes were documented legally, witnessed, and are fully enforceable. He nodded toward the envelope. He asked me to give you that before we discuss the specifics. She took the envelope, turned it over. The back was sealed with a small circle of red wax. No insignia, just a plain impression. She broke it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was deliberate and slightly uneven, like someone writing through discomfort. Asterisk Miss Vasquez, asterisk. Asterisk, you didn't look at me like I was anything other than a man who needed coffee. You have no idea what a rare thing that is. Asterisk. Asterisk, I have spent my life surrounded by people who wanted something from me. I wanted, at least once, to choose someone who wanted nothing. Asterisk. Asterisk, what I am leaving you is real. It is also dangerous. You do not have to accept it. But if you do, trust no one who comes to you smiling. Asterisk. Asterisk KF asterisk. Elena read it twice. Then she set it down on the coffee table between them. What exactly, she said slowly, are we talking about? Gerald opened a second folder, liquid assets, property holdings, and controlling interest in several businesses. He paused. The total estimated value is approximately $43 million. The room went very quiet. Outside, a car honked. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. Elena's upstairs neighbor, as always, walked too heavily across his floor. And the dangerous part, she asked. Gerald closed the folder carefully. He looked at her with something she would later recognize as pity. Mr. Ferri had a son, he said. His name was Marco Ferri, and he called before the lawyer had even made it back to the elevator. Elena was still sitting on her couch, the open envelope on the table in front of her, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Something made her. Elena Vasquez. It wasn't a question. The voice on the other end was younger than she expected, smooth, almost casual, but with an edge underneath it like a blade wrapped in velvet. Yes, she said carefully. My name is Marco Ferri. I believe you've just had a very interesting meeting. Her chest tightened. How do you know that? Because Gerald Hatch has worked for my family for 30 years and his car has been parked outside your building for the last 40 minutes. A pause. I'm not calling to threaten you, Miss Vasquez. I want you to know that. That's exactly what someone would say if they were threatening me. A short silence. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a genuine sound, almost warm. Fair point. Can we meet? Absolutely not. I understand. His tone shifted, softened just slightly. My father was a difficult man. Whatever he told you about me in that letter, and I can guess. I just want one conversation. That's all. Elena's eyes dropped to the letter on the table. Asterisk, trust no one who comes to you smiling. Asterisk. I'll think about it, she said, and hung up. She sat with the silence for a long time. Then she called the only person she trusted completely. Rosa Vasquez arrived 20 minutes later with a bag of groceries she hadn't needed to buy and the expression of a woman preparing for war. She was Elena's older sister by 4 years, rounder, louder, and sharper than anyone Elena had ever known. She read the letter standing at the kitchen counter. She read it, again sitting down. Then she set it on the table and looked at her sister with dark, steady eyes. Tell me everything, Rosa said, from the beginning. Elena told her. The old man, the napkin, the pen, the pie. The lawyer, the letter, the number on the folder that still didn't feel real. And then Marco's call, the voice, the laugh, the request. Rosa listened without interrupting, which was rare. When Elena finished, Rosa was quiet for a moment. $43 million, Rosa said. Yes, from a man you served pie to. Cherry pie. Rosa pressed her lips together. And his son already called you. Within minutes of the lawyer leaving, Rosa stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the brick wall across the alley. You know what our mother used to say about gifts that arrive without explanation? That they always come with a price you haven't seen yet. Exactly, Rosa turned back. So what do you want to do? Elena looked at the envelope, at the handwriting. At the words asterisk, you wanted nothing. Asterisk? I don't know, she said. But I think I want to understand why he chose me, a stranger. Out of everyone he could have given this to, she looked up at her sister. That has to mean something. Rosa studied her for a long moment. Then she exhaled. Then we figure it out together, she said. But Elena, we do this carefully. We don't move fast. We don't trust easily. And the first sign anything feels wrong. The buzzer to Elena's apartment rang. Both women went still. Elena crossed to the intercom. Who is it? A pause, then a voice, not Marco's, someone older, rougher. Ms. Vasquez, we represent certain associates of the late Mr. Heir. We'd like to discuss the terms of his estate before you make any decisions. Another pause. It would be in your best interest to let us up. Rosa looked at Elena. Elena looked at the door. The buzzer rang again, longer this time. Elena did not buzz them up. Instead, she grabbed her coat, her phone, and the envelope. Rosa was already moving, keys in hand, bag on shoulder, the kind of instinctive readiness that came from years of being the older sister who fixed things. They went out the back, down the service stairwell that smelled like mildew and old paint, and into the alley behind the building. Neither of them spoke until they were 3 blocks away. Gerald Hatch picked up on the second ring. 2 men came to my apartment, Elena said. They said they represent associates of Aldo Heir. Who are they? A long pause on the other end, longer than it should have been. Ms. Vasquez, where are you right now? Walking. Why? Keep walking. Don't go back to your apartment tonight. His voice had changed. The careful, measured tone was still there, but beneath it now was something tighter. The men who came to your door almost certainly work for Vincent Cara. He was a business partner of Mr. Heir's. The relationship ended badly several years ago. Mr. Cara believes he has a claim to a portion of the estate. Does he? Legally, no, but men like Vincent Cara don't typically rely on legal frameworks. Another pause. I should have warned you this was a possibility. I apologize. I underestimated the timeline. Elena stopped walking. Rosa nearly ran into her. You knew this could happen, Elena said, her voice dropping low, and you still handed me that envelope and walked out the door. I had obligations to fulfill. To a dead man, she exhaled sharply. What do I do? There is a hotel on Mercer Street, the Aldwine. Check in under your sister's name, yes. I know about your sister. Mr. Heir was thorough. Stay there tonight. I'll arrange a meeting tomorrow morning with someone who can help you navigate this. Who? A beat. Marco Heir. Elena closed her eyes. The Aldwine was the kind of hotel that existed in the space between shabby and dignified clean rooms, heavy curtains, a lobby that smelled faintly of cedar. The woman at the desk didn't look twice at Rosa's name. Once they were in the room, Rosa sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her sister with an expression Elena recognized, the one that meant Rosa was frightened but refusing to show it fully. Talk to me, Rosa said. Gerald wants me to meet with Marco tomorrow. The son. Yes. Rosa was quiet for a moment. And you trust Gerald? I don't trust anyone right now. Smart. Rosa pulled her knees up. But Elena, think about this. Why would the old man leave everything to you, not to his son, not to a charity, not to anyone who knew him? She paused. What if it wasn't random? What if he had a reason, a specific reason, and that reason puts you in the middle of something that started long before Tuesday night? Elena hadn't let herself go there yet. She went there now. The letter, I have spent my life surrounded by people who wanted something from me. The napkin, her name, in her own handwriting, folded into his pocket. The timing, a dying man walking into a diner he had never been to before on a Tuesday night in November, in the rain. She opened her phone and searched his name for the first time. Asterisk Aldo Heir, known associate of the Cara crime family. Federal investigation, 2009, charges dropped. Rumored split from Kara organization, 2018, asterisk. She kept reading. Her face went still. She found a photograph, a news article from 11 years ago. Aldo Ferri outside a courthouse, younger and smiling. And beside him, barely visible at the edge of the frame, a woman. Dark hair, dark eyes, a face Elena knew as well as her own. Her mother. Elena stared at the photograph until the screen dimmed and went dark. She turned it back on, looked again, told herself she was wrong, that grief did strange things to pattern recognition, that the mind found familiar faces in strangers the way it found shapes in clouds. But she wasn't wrong. The woman at the edge of the frame was Marisol Vasquez, Elena's mother. Dead 6 years from a stroke that came quietly in the night, in the small house in Providence where Elena and Rosa had grown up. A woman who had worked as a seamstress, who had made rice and beans every Sunday, who had kept exactly 3 photographs on her mantle and never once spoken about her life before Rhode Island. Rosa was leaning over her shoulder now. Elena hadn't heard her move. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Rosa sat back down on the edge of the bed, slowly, like the air had gone out of her. "That's not possible," Rosa said. "I know. Mama she never said anything about. I know." Rosa pressed her hand flat against her sternum, a habit she had when something hit too hard. What was the year on that article? 2014. We were already in Providence by then. Mama had been there 12 years. Rosa's voice was careful, deliberate, the way it got when she was working hard to stay level. So she knew him before, from wherever she was before Providence. Elena pulled up everything she could find. The articles were scattered, incomplete. Aldo Ferri was a man who had spent decades staying mostly out of print, but she found enough. He had operated primarily out of New York. He had been connected to the Kara organization beginning in the late 1980s. His formal break from Vincent Kara had happened in 2018, described in one federal document as a dispute over territory and, in another, more obliquely as asterisk a personal matter. Asterisk. Their mother had come to Providence in 2002. Elena did the math slowly, the way you do when you're hoping the numbers will come out differently. "Rosa," she said quietly, "how old was Mama when she had you?" Rosa blinked. 22. Why? And where did she say she was living before Providence? New York. You know this. And she never said why she left. It wasn't a question. They both knew the answer. Their mother had given it so many times it had become a kind of ritual, a closed door they had both learned not to knock on. Asterisk some chapters end. Asterisk she used to say asterisk you don't have to read them twice. Asterisk. Elena set the phone face down on the bedspread. "I think Aldo Ferri knew Mama," she said, not casually. "I think he knew her the way you know someone who changed the direction of your life." She paused. "And I think that's why he came into that diner. I don't think it was random. I think he found me." Rose's eyes were bright now, the way they got before she cried, though she wouldn't cry yet. Why didn't he just say that? Because he was dying and he was afraid and he had spent 50 years being careful. Elena picked up the letter again. She read the last line aloud. Asterisk trust no one who comes to you smiling. Asterisk he couldn't say it directly, but he left me everything. He left me his name on a legal document. He left me a trail. She looked at her sister. "I think Aldo Ferri was protecting us," she said. "The way he couldn't protect Mama. And I think Vincent Kara is the reason why." Rosa was very still. Then her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number, not the same one Marco had called from. Different. 3 words only. She knew everything. Elena read the text 4 times. She knew everything. She looked at Rosa. Rosa looked at her. The room felt smaller than it had a moment ago. The heavy curtains suddenly less like comfort and more like walls. "Who sent that?" Rosa asked. "I don't know." "Forward it to Gerald." Elena did. Then she set the phone down and walked to the window. She pulled back the curtain an inch and looked at the street below. Normal. Quiet. A cab moving slowly through the wet dark. a man walking a dog, a light on in the building across the way. Nothing alarming, nothing that looked like danger. That was almost worse. She let the curtain fall. She didn't sleep. Rosa managed a few hours, curled on top of the covers in her coat, breathing the slow, careful breath of someone who had learned to rest in difficult places. Elena sat in the chair by the window with the letter in her lap and her mother's face in her mind. Marisol Vasquez had been a quiet woman, not cold, never cold, but contained, the way certain people are when they have learned that the world takes more than it gives and the safest response is to need very little. She had loved her daughters with a fierce, wordless consistency. She had cooked. She had sewn. She had sat between them on the couch on Sunday evenings and watched old films without sound because she said the pictures told the story well enough. She had never mentioned New York except in the vaguest terms. She had never mentioned a man named Aldo Ferri, but she had kept a box. Elena remembered it suddenly, the way memories surface when you finally give them permission, a small wooden box, dark-stained, with a brass clasp, that lived on the highest shelf of her mother's bedroom closet. Elena had asked about it once, when she was perhaps 9 years old. Her mother had said it held private things. The tone of her voice had been enough. Elena had never asked again. After the funeral, Rosa had packed their mother's belongings. Elena hadn't been able to. She had stood in the doorway of that bedroom while Rosa worked, handing over garbage bags and boxes for donation, and she had never once thought to ask about the wooden box. She looked at her sister sleeping. She would ask in the morning. She would ask if Rosa had kept it. But she already knew, with the deep, irrational certainty that sometimes arrives ahead of evidence, that the box existed, that Rosa had kept it, and that inside it was something that would rewrite everything she thought she knew about where she came from. At 6 a.m. Gerald called. The text came from a burner. He said, without greeting. We can't trace it, but the phrasing, he paused. There is one person who would know to say it that way. Someone who was close to your mother, in New York. Someone who has been watching this situation develop for some time. Who? Elena asked. Her name is Donna Reyes. She was your mother's closest friend, before Providence. She and your mother had a falling out. The details aren't entirely clear to me, but I know Aldo Ferri was at the center of it. He hesitated. She reached out to Mr. Ferri's estate 3 weeks ago. Before he died, she wanted to warn him about something. Warn him about what? That Vincent Cara had discovered the connection between your mother and Mr. Ferri. A careful pause. And that Cara had also discovered you. The chair beneath Elena suddenly felt very thin. He knew about me, she said, before Tuesday night. Yes, so the men at my door yesterday were not a surprise reaction to the inheritance. Gerald's voice was quiet and grave. They were already coming, Ms. Vasquez. Mr. Ferri made you his heir precisely to give you something to stand behind. Legal protection, resources, a name attached to his estate rather than simply being an anonymous target. He exhaled. He didn't choose you because you served him pie. He chose you because you were already in danger, and he was the reason why. Rosa was awake now. She was sitting up on the bed, watching Elena's face. Elena set the phone down without saying goodbye. Rosa, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Did you keep Mama's wooden box? Rosa went very still. Then, slowly, she nodded. The box was in Rosa's apartment, on the highest shelf of her bedroom closet. Of course it was. Rosa had driven back alone to retrieve it while Elena stayed at the Aldwyn. Gerald's instructions firm in her ear. Asterisk, do not move. Do not open the door. Do not speak to anyone until I call you back. Asterisk. She sat in the chair by the window again, watching the street, counting cabs, trying to keep her mind from running too far ahead of itself. It didn't work. By the time Rosa returned, Elena had constructed and dismantled a dozen versions of the truth. Each one heard differently. Rosa set the box on the small table between their beds. It was exactly as Elena remembered, dark wood, brass clasp, worn smooth at the corners from years of being handled and then deliberately put away. It smelled faintly of cedar and something older underneath, something that belonged to their mother. They looked at it for a moment without speaking. Then Elena opened it. There were letters, 12 of them, bound with a piece of kitchen twine, written on paper so thin it had gone translucent at the folds. No envelopes, just folded sheets. Each one dated in a handwriting Elena didn't recognize, tight, slanted, controlled. The earliest was dated March 1999, the most recent, November 2001, 1 month before their mother had moved to Providence. Elena unfolded the first one carefully. The way you handle something you know cannot be repaired if it tears. Asterisk Marisol, asterisk. Asterisk, I am not asking you to forgive me. I know better than that. I am only asking you to be safe. Take the girls somewhere he won't think to look. I will handle Vincent. I should have handled him years ago and I didn't. And that failure belongs to me entirely. Asterisk. Asterisk, the money I left with Donna will last you 2 years if you're careful. After that, I will find another way. I will always find another way. You know that. Asterisk. Asterisk, don't write back. Don't call. I mean that as protection, not abandonment. There is a difference, even if it doesn't feel like one. Asterisk. Asteriska. Asterisk. Elena's hands were trembling slightly. She set the letter down flat on the table and pressed her palms against it, steadying herself. Rosa was reading over her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. They read all 12 letters in order, passing them back and forth in silence. The story assembled itself slowly, the way a photograph develops in a darkroom, emerging from blankness into something undeniable. Although Ferrai and Marisol Vasquez had been together for nearly 4 years, beginning in 1995, he had been trying to separate himself from the Kara organization. Even then, quietly, carefully, the way a man extracts himself from something that will not let go without a fight. Vince and Kara had discovered the relationship and had used their mother as leverage. When Aldo refused a particular demand, Kara had made a threat, specific enough that Aldo had spent the following week arranging for Marisol and her daughters to disappear from New York entirely. Rosa had been 6, Elena had been 2, neither of them had any memory of the city they had left. The final letter was the shortest. You are the best thing that happened to me in a life that didn't deserve you. The girls will never know my name, and that is right and correct, and it still costs me something every morning. Keep them small and quiet and far away from everything I am. Give them a life I couldn't give you. Asterisk, I'm sorry, Marisol, for all of it, for loving you in a world like mine. Asteriska, asterisk. Rosa sat down on the bed. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Elena looked at the letters spread across the table, at her mother's wooden box, at the brass clasp worn smooth by hands that had opened and closed it in private, in the dark, in the years after Providence, in the years of rice and beans and Sunday films and a life built deliberately small. She understood now. Her mother had known, had always known, had carried it alone, the way she carried everything, quietly, completely, without asking her daughters to share the weight. Elena's phone rang. Marco Ferrai. She answered it. I think, she said, before he could speak, that we need to meet. A pause, then his voice, careful and low. I know about your mother, Elena. I've known for a long time. Another pause. And when he spoke again, something in his voice had shifted, something that sounded, unmistakably, like grief. My father told me everything 3 weeks ago. Before he went into that diner, he stopped. I think we need to talk about Vincent Kara tonight, because he isn't waiting. Outside the hotel window, a black car had been parked across the street for the last 40 minutes. Elena hadn't mentioned it to Rosa. She was mentioning it now. Marco Ferrai was not what Elena had built in her mind. He was perhaps 40, lean and dark-haired, with his father's pale gray eyes set in a younger face that carried the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent years trying to be different from where he came from. He wore no jewelry. His coat was plain. He arrived at the Aldwin's side entrance alone, which Gerald had insisted upon and which Marco had agreed to without argument. Elena met him in the small conference room off the lobby. Rosa sat beside her. Gerald stood near the door. Marco sat across the table and folded his hands and looked at Elena, the way his father had looked at her, across the diner counter, with a directness that felt less like scrutiny and more like recognition. "The car outside is Kara's," he said, without preamble. "Two men. They've been rotating shifts since yesterday morning. They're not here to talk." "Then what are they here for?" Rosa asked. "To wait. Kara wants Elena to make a move, accept the estate formally, sign the transfer documents, step into the open. The moment she does, she becomes a target he can justify to his associates." Marco's jaw tightened. "In Kara's world, inheriting my father's assets without his permission is an act of aggression. He'll frame it that way. He needs to." "Why?" Elena asked. "Because my father spent 20 years quietly, moving assets out of Kara's reach, property, accounts, controlling interests in businesses that Kara believed he co-owned." Marco looked at the table for a moment. "My father was meticulous. By the time Kara realized what was happening, the legal architecture was airtight. Everything was already in trust. And the trust, as of Tuesday night, belongs to you." The room was very quiet. "So this isn't really about me," Elena said slowly. "It was never about you personally. You are the key to a lock Kara has been trying to pick for years." Marco looked up. "But my father made it about you, deliberately, because an unknown woman with no criminal ties, no record, no connection to any of this. She's harder to move against than someone inside the world. Legally, ethically, publicly." He paused. "He built you a shield. The question is whether you're willing to hold it." Elena thought about the letter. Asterisk, "What I am leaving you is real. It is also dangerous." Asterisk, "What does holding it look like?" She asked. "You accept the estate formally today, with Gerald as witness. That activates the legal protections my father put in place, injunctions, a series of disclosures held by 3 separate law firms that go public if anything happens to you." Marco leaned forward slightly. "Kara is dangerous, but he is not stupid. He has survived this long by knowing when a move costs more than it gains. If you are formally protected, publicly named, with documentation that implicates him should you be harmed, he has no play. And if he doesn't care," Rosa said. Marco was quiet for a beat too long. Gerald shifted near the door. "There's something else," Elena said. She was watching Marco's face. "Something you haven't said yet." Marco exhaled slowly. "Kara knows about your mother. He knew about her in 1999 when my father sent her away. He has spent 26 years believing that Marisol Vasquez took something from him when she left. Not money, not property, information. She witnessed something in 1998 that Kara could never allow into a courtroom. He looked at Elena steadily. He was never going to leave you alone regardless of the estate. My father knew that. This inheritance was his way of giving you something to fight with." The door to the conference room opened. It was the hotel manager, pale, visibly shaken, the phone in his hand pressed against his chest. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "There are 2 men in the lobby. They say they have a meeting with a Miss Vasquez." He swallowed. "They walked past our security desk before we could stop them." Rosa stood up immediately. Marco was already on his feet, his hand moving to his phone. Elena stayed seated for one breath longer. She looked at the table, at the space where her mother's letters would have been if she had brought them, at her own hands, steady now in the way that sometimes happens when fear reaches a certain point and becomes something harder and quieter. She stood up. "Gerald," she said, "do you have the acceptance documents with you?" Gerald blinked. Yes, but then let's sign them right. Now she looked at Marco. You said the moment it's formal, the protections activate. Yes. How fast? Immediately. The disclosures are pre-staged. One call from Gerald triggers them. Elena turned to Gerald. Make the call first, then I sign. Gerald stared at her for a half second. Then he reached into his briefcase with both hands. From the lobby, they could hear voices now, low, insistent, the manager's nervous replies. Gerald dialed, spoke 4 words into the phone, hung up, laid the documents on the table and uncapped a pen, a plain pen. Nothing like the heavy silver one an old man had handed her across a diner counter. Elena picked it up. She signed her name, Elena Maria Vasquez, the same name she had, written on a napkin 4 days ago for a quiet man eating cherry pie in the rain. The lobby went silent. Then footsteps, retreating, not advancing. Marco let out a breath he had been holding for what seemed like a very long time. 3 weeks later, the cherry pie at Morrow's all-night diner was still good. Elena sat in the same booth where Aldo Farah had sat on a Tuesday night in November. She had asked for that specifically when she came in, before her shift, before the apron, before the burnt coffee smell settled back into her clothes. She had asked Deb, the day manager, if she could just sit for a few minutes. Deb, who had known Elena for 3 years and never once asked an unnecessary question, had brought her coffee without being asked and left her alone. Elena wrapped both hands around the mug and looked out at the rain. It was raining again. Of course it was. Vincent Cara had not come quietly, but he had come. The disclosures Gerald triggered that night in the Aldwine conference room had reached 3 federal prosecutors, 2 investigative journalists, and a sealed grand jury file that had been waiting 11 years for exactly this kind of evidence. Whatever Marisol Vasquez had witnessed in 1998, whatever, she had carried silently through a lifetime of Sunday films and careful, small living had been documented. Aldo Farah had documented it meticulously, patiently, over decades. The way a man prepares something he knows he won't live to see finished. Cara's attorneys had made noise for exactly 4 days. Then they had gone very quiet. The 2 men from the lobby of the Aldwine had not been seen since. Elena had not gone back to her apartment yet. She wasn't sure she would. There was money now, a fact that still sat strangely in her mind, like furniture arranged in a room she hadn't learned to walk through in the dark. Gerald was patient with her questions, and there were many. Marco had been patient too, in his careful, gray-eyed way, answering what he could and admitting plainly when he couldn't. He was not his father, but he carried his father's precision and his father's guilt. And something else Elena was only beginning to understand, a genuine desire to make right what had been made wrong before. Either of them were old enough to have any say in it. They were not friends yet, but they were something. A word for it would come eventually. Rosa had cried exactly once the morning after the hotel. She had sat at the small table in the Aldwine room with their mothers, letters spread in front of her. And she had cried without sound, the way their mother had taught them both without meaning to contained, complete, and then finished. Afterward she had made Elena eat breakfast. Then she had said, with the particular rosiness that Elena loved most in the world, Mama spent 20 years protecting us from something that was actually protecting us back. That's either very beautiful or very complicated. Probably both. Elena had said. Probably both. Rosa agreed. They had not talked about it again yet. They would. There was time now, which was perhaps the strangest gift of all, the sense that the urgency had lifted, that the thing chasing them had been named and faced and had blinked first. Their mother had left New York at 34 with 2 small daughters, a wooden box, and a silence she wore like a second skin. She had built a life out of almost nothing, and she had built it well. She had kept them safe in the only way available to her, by keeping them small and quiet and far from everything she had survived. Elena understood that now, completely, without bitterness, which surprised her. Although Farah had loved her mother in a world that made love dangerous, he had spent 26 years trying to undo the damage that world had done. He had walked into a diner in the rain on the last week of his life, and he had looked at the daughter of the woman he had never stopped grieving, and he had seen someone who asked for nothing. And he had given her everything he had. Deb appeared at the edge of the booth. She refilled Elena's coffee without asking, the way she always did. "You starting your shift or what?" she said, not unkindly. Elena looked up at her. "Actually," she said, "I think this is my last one." Deb raised an eyebrow. Yeah. Elena wrapped her hands around the fresh mug. "I'm going to need a few months to figure some things out." Deb studied her for a moment with the particular wisdom of a woman who had managed a diner for 20 years and heard most of what people had to say. "You okay?" Elena considered the question honestly. She thought about a napkin with her name on it, about 12 letters bound with kitchen twine, about a wooden box worn smooth by hands that had opened it in the dark, about a woman who had made rice and beans every Sunday and never once asked her daughters to carry what she carried, about the weight of being chosen by someone who had watched you from a distance and decided, in the quiet of their own ending, that you were worth protecting. "Yeah," Elena said, "I think I am." She left a $20 tip on the table. Then she walked out into the rain, not running, not hiding, not looking over her shoulder, just walking, steady and unhurried, into a life that was finally, completely her own. She had signed her name on a napkin for a stranger, and in doing so, she had finally found out who she was.